Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that we have a historic housing crisis? Politicians promising to build 1.5 million homes, families desperate for shelter, emergency meetings about affordability, and yet the people we need to solve this crisis are going bankrupt trying to build, not struggling, not barely surviving, bankrupt. Construction insolvencies are now the fastest growing category of business failure in this country, rising 30% year over year. The very act of building a home in 2026 has become a mathematically losing proposition. Drive through Toronto, drive through Vancouver, look up at the skyline. You'll see cranes, massive hulking machines silhouetted against the sky. But look closer. Look at the ground. Where are the workers? Where is the movement? Those cranes aren't moving. That's not a holiday break. That's not a weather delay. That's a default. We are witnessing the emergence of what the industry quietly calls ghost sites, massive towers that are half built but legally dead. Developers have run out of cash. Lenders have shut off the tap. And buyers, ordinary people who put down their life savings, are trapped in a concrete purgatory. Let me give you the scale of what we're looking at. We're talking about over $150 billion. That's not a projection. That's not a worst case scenario. That's the estimated value of stalled or at-risk projects across the greater Toronto, Hamilton area and Vancouver alone. $150 billion of half-finished buildings rusting in the sky. And here's the number that should make your stomach turn: 31,396 units. That's the record number of condo completions scheduled for 2025. Record completions, you'd think that's good news, right? More supply to ease the crisis, except these projects are finishing into a market with 6.2 months of inventory, 3 times the normal average. They're building into a void. And if you want to understand just how dead this market has become, consider this. In Q1 2025, Toronto condo sales hit their lowest level since 1990. We're talking 215 sales citywide in one of the largest metropolitan areas in North America. The market hasn't slowed down. It has flatlined. This is not a correction. This is not a cyclical downturn. This is a structural fault line, and we are watching it crack open in real time. The crisis we're facing has a name, and I call it the profitability inverse. Here's what that means in plain language. It costs over $1,000 per square foot to build a condo today. That's your land acquisition, your hard costs, concrete, steel, labor, and your soft costs like financing, legal fees, permits, over $1,000 per square foot. But the resale market price has fallen to $812 per square foot. Do you see the problem? Every shovel that goes into the ground loses money. Every foundation that's poured burns cash. Developers aren't stopping because they're lazy or greedy. They're stopping because the alternative is financial annihilation. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare was born. We need to understand the genesis of this crisis, because what's happening right now isn't random. It's the final act of a trap that was set 4 years ago. Go back to 2021, the height of the pre-sale mania. The market was on fire. Buyers were lining up around the block, sometimes camping overnight, to get allocation in new developments. Developers were launching projects and selling out in hours. The frenzy was intoxicating. And here's what happened. Developers sold units in 2021 based on 2021 construction costs. Back then, hard costs, the actual expense of concrete, steel, labor, were running around $250 per square foot. Projects penciled out, margins looked healthy, everyone signed contracts. But those contracts locked in prices. The buyer agreed to pay $800,000 for a unit. The developer agreed to deliver it, legally binding, except between 2021 and 2025, something catastrophic happened. Inflation, not the 2% kind we were used to. the structural, persistent, supply chain breaking kind. By 2025, those same hard costs had surged to over 330 per square foot, 30% increase. So now the developer is legally obligated to sell the unit at the old low price, the 2021 price, but has to build it at the new high cost, the 2025 cost. They are insolvent the moment they pour the concrete. They are building themselves into bankruptcy with every truckload of cement. This is what I mean when I say this is not a business cycle. This is a contract death spiral. And here's the mechanism that's tearing through the industry right now, the black box that most people don't understand, the receivership freeze. Think of it as the repo man for skyscrapers. Here's how it works. A developer takes out a construction loan, often not from a traditional bank, but from a private lender, a mortgage investment corporation, or a syndicate of wealthy investors. The loan has terms, milestones, payment schedules. The developer misses a payment. Maybe they ran out of cash because pre-sales fell through. Maybe their credit line got pulled. Doesn't matter. The lender, sensing trouble, petitions the court to appoint a receiver, and that's when everything stops. The receiver is a court-appointed third party whose job is to preserve the asset and figure out who gets paid first. But while that legal process grinds forward, and we're talking 12 to 24 months minimum, the construction site is frozen. Contractors walk off the job because they're not getting paid. Cranes stop turning. The building sits exposed to wind, rain, ice. Materials degrade. Vandalism becomes an issue. The structure doesn't just pause, it rots. It deteriorates in legal limbo while lawyers fight over the carcass. And here's what they don't tell you. It's not just the small developers. It's not just the fly-by-night operators with no track record. Major players, developers with 30-year histories, prestigious projects, blue-chip reputations are being taken under. Let me give you a name. Mizrahi Developments, the one. A flagship billion-dollar-plus tower, the most prestigious project in Canada. Receivership. If the crown jewel can fail, anything can fail. Or consider Vandyk Properties, a major developer with multiple sites across the region. Projects like the Uptowns, thousands of buyers waiting, receivership. These aren't outliers. These are the Canaries, and the coal mine is filling with gas. Now, let me tell you what this means for the people, the actual human beings caught in this machine. There are three groups, and all of them are trapped. First, the developers themselves. They face an impossible choice: build and lose money, or stop and get sued. If they keep building, they burn through cash and spiral toward insolvency. If they stop, buyers and lenders sue them for breach of contract. There is no good option. It's a choice between bankruptcy now or bankruptcy later. Second, the buyers, people who put down $100,000 deposits in 2021, young couples, immigrant families, first-time buyers, stretching every dollar to get into the market. They signed agreements in good faith. They were promised occupancy in 2024, then 2025, now indefinite. If the project gets canceled, they might get their principal deposit back eventually after years of legal wrangling. But here's what they don't get back: time. 4 years of inflation have destroyed their buying power. That $100,000 deposit in 2021 could have bought them options. In 2025, it buys them nothing but a lesson in sunk costs. And third, the city itself. Toronto, Vancouver, skylines filled with skeleton towers, half-finished structures generating zero tax revenue but creating massive safety hazards, fencing, security, legal liability. These ghost sites are monuments to a credit system that has imploded. Friends, we need to talk about what's actually happening here, because the surface story, developers running out of money, is too simple. The real story is about the funding gap, and it's widening every single day. Let me explain. A construction project doesn't get funded all at once. It's staged. The developer secures a construction loan based on pre-sales. Let's say they sell 70% of the units. The bank says, great, we'll lend you $200 million to build. But that loan is released in tranches, increments tied to construction milestones. Foundation complete, 10% released. Framing done, another 15%, and so on. The model assumes everything goes according to plan, except nothing is going according to plan. Pre-sales are falling through because buyers can't get mortgage approvals. Rates have doubled, or buyers are walking away, forfeiting their deposits because they realize the unit is worth less than they agreed to pay. So the developer's pre-sale percentage drops. They were at 70%, now they're at 55%, and the lender says, not good enough, we're cutting your credit line. The developer is now halfway through construction with half the funding they need to finish. They're stuck. They can't go forward. They can't go back. The project dies in midair. And this leads us to the system's most crucial secret, which we need to explore now. The thing that nobody in the industry wants to admit out loud. These projects cannot be finished under current ownership. The equity must be wiped to zero. Let me explain what that means in human terms. When a developer starts a project, they put in equity, their own money, investor money, partner capital. Let's say it's $50 million on a $200 million project. The rest is debt, construction loans. Now the project is worth less than the debt. The market value of the half-finished building is $150 million, but they owe $180 million to the lender. The equity isn't worth less. It's worth nothing, less than nothing. It's a negative number. For this project to finish, someone has to come in, buy the debt for pennies on the dollar, wipe out the existing equity holders, and restart construction with a clean balance sheet and realistic pricing. That's not a restructuring. That's a liquidation. And the original investors, the people who believed in the project, who put up the capital, they get annihilated. This is the part that should terrify you, because this process, this cleansing, as they call it in the industry, doesn't happen cleanly or quickly. It happens through receivership, which we talked about. It happens through bankruptcy court. It happens through years of legal trench warfare while the building sits exposed to the elements deteriorating. And here's the kicker. The vulture funds know this. They're not circling. They're already here. Private equity firms, distressed asset funds, opportunistic capital from south of the border. They're sitting on billions in dry powder, waiting for these projects to hit the auction block. They'll buy the debt at 40 cents on the dollar, take control of the project, and finish it when the market recovers. But that could be 3 years from now, 5 years, who knows? In the meantime, the ghost sites multiply. Now, let me show you the evidence that this isn't speculation. This is happening right now, and the data is screaming at us. Housing starts in Toronto are down 58% year over year in 2025. 58%. We're not slowing down. We're stopping. Let that sink in for a moment. Politicians are on television every week talking about the housing crisis, promising bold action, emergency measures, and the actual construction of housing has collapsed by more than half. It's not a supply problem anymore. It's a financing problem. The credit is gone. And here's the human cost. Over 10,000 construction workers lost their jobs in Toronto alone this year. Remember 6 months ago when every news outlet was running stories about the labor shortage, how we didn't have enough skilled tradespeople to build all the housing we needed? That narrative has flipped overnight. We now have a labor surplus. Carpenters, electricians, crane operators sitting at home because the sites are dead. The shortage wasn't real. The credit was real. And when the credit vanished, so did the jobs. Let me give you the canaries in the coal mine, the specific failures that prove the rot is systemic. First canary, the one, Mizrahi Developments. This was supposed to be Canada's tallest residential tower, a landmark. The kind of project that defines a skyline for a generation. Over $1 billion in construction value. Receivership. The most prestigious project in the country couldn't survive the credit crunch. If the one can fail, what does that tell you about the 100 smaller projects that don't have the same brand recognition, the same deep-pocketed backers? Second canary, Vandyk Properties, not a small player, not some startup developer trying to make a quick buck. A major firm with multiple developments across the region, the uptowns, the commons, projects with thousands of units, receivership, and now you have thousands of buyers in limbo, people who saved for years to put down a deposit, people who sold their existing homes because they thought their new condo would be ready. They're stuck. Their money is locked in a legal process that could take years to resolve. They can't buy anything else. They can't move forward. They're frozen. Third canary, and this is the one that should make your blood run cold, the deposit trap. Let me walk you through what this means for a real person. In 2021, you put down a $100,000 deposit on a pre-construction condo. The developer promised occupancy in 2024. You planned your life around that date. Maybe you gave notice to your landlord. Maybe you sold furniture. Maybe you turned down other opportunities because you thought you were locked in. Now it's 2025. The project is in receivership. The developer isn't building. The receiver is sorting through the wreckage. Eventually, maybe in 2026, maybe in 2027, you might get your $100,000 back. Might, if the receiver determines that deposits are protected under the trust agreement, if there's enough money left after the senior lenders are paid, if the legal process doesn't drain the remaining funds. But let's say you're lucky. Let's say you get your $100,000 back. Here's what you don't get back: your purchasing power. In 2021, $100,000 was 20% down on a $500,000 property. In 2025, after 4 years of inflation, after 4 years of rising costs, that same $100,000 is maybe 15% down on a property that now costs $650,000. And you can't qualify for the mortgage anyway because rates have doubled. So you get your nominal deposit back, but you're poorer, significantly poorer, not on paper, in reality. You've lost years of your life and your ability to enter the housing market, and there's nobody to sue because the developer is bankrupt. This is what I mean when I talk about the no escape encirclement. Every traditional option is closing. Let me walk through the logic. You think, okay, developers are in trouble. I'll just wait and buy when they're forced to discount. Except the units aren't being discounted, they're being canceled. The projects are dying before they reach the market. You think, fine, I'll buy a completed unit resale. Except the resale market has 6.2 months of inventory and sales have hit a 35-year low. Sellers are desperate, but buyers can't get financing because the banks have tightened lending standards. You think, I'll just rent and wait this out. Except rents are still climbing because new supply has stopped and immigration continues. You're trapped in a rental market that's squeezing you while the ownership market is imploding. And for the developers themselves, the trap is even tighter. If they keep building, they lose money on every unit. The profitability gap, the difference between the $1,000 per square foot cost to build and the $812 per square foot they can sell for, guarantees insolvency. But if they stop building, they get sued by buyers for breach of contract. They get sued by lenders for defaulting on construction loans. They get sued by contractors for unpaid invoices. There is no third option. The system has created a scenario where the rational choice is to go bankrupt as slowly as possible, hoping for a miracle that isn't coming. And here's where the structural forces converge, the trifecta that makes this crisis inevitable. Force number one, record insolvencies. We're seeing the highest rate of construction company failures in a decade. Not just developers, general contractors, sub-trades, suppliers, the entire supply chain is buckling. Force number two, record inventory. Those 396 units completing in 2025, they're hitting a market that can't absorb them. Every month, more supply piles up while demand craters. Force number three, the funding gap. Lenders, both traditional banks and private lenders, are refusing to fund project completions. They're looking at half-finished buildings and saying, we're not throwing good money after bad. When those three forces hit simultaneously, you don't get a soft landing. You get a liquidation event. And we're watching it unfold in slow motion, one ghost site at a time. Now, let me talk about the psychological trap that's keeping people paralyzed, because this isn't just about money. It's about how our minds work and why we're terrible at recognizing structural breaks when they happen. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, and it's destroying investors right now. Here's how it works. You've already committed resources, time, money, emotional energy to a decision. The rational move is to evaluate your current options based on future outcomes, ignoring what you've already spent. But human beings don't work that way. We think, I've already put in $100,000. I've already waited 3 years. If I walk away now, all of that is wasted. So we hold on, we double down, we wait for the market to rebound so the project can finish and we can salvage something. Except the math doesn't work. These projects aren't delayed, they're insolvent. The equity needs to be wiped to zero before construction can restart. Your $100,000 isn't invested, it's gone. It's a sunk cost. And every month you wait, inflation is eroding what little purchasing power you have left. The rational move is to cut your losses, get whatever portion of your deposit you can recover, and redeploy that capital into something real, something you can touch, something that exists. But most people won't do that. They'll wait, they'll hope, they'll tell themselves stories about how the market always recovers, how real estate always goes up in the long run, how their project is different, and they'll be wrong because this isn't a normal cycle. This is a structural break. The old rules don't apply when the credit system itself has seized up. And this brings us to the binary choice that everyone facing this crisis needs to make, and they need to make it now. The window for preparation is closing. Here's the choice, stated as plainly as I can. Do you own assets, or do you own claims on assets? Do you own physical reality, or do you own paper promises? Because what we're witnessing with these ghost sites is the violent collapse of the distinction between those two categories. A pre-construction contract is not an asset. It's a claim on a future asset that may never exist. It's a promise that a building will be built, that you'll be able to close, that the unit will be worth what you agreed to pay. But promises aren't enforceable when the counterparty is bankrupt. You can have the best contract in the world, ironclad legal language. But if the developer is insolvent and the project is in receivership, that contract becomes a piece of paper entitling you to stand in line with other creditors and hope there's something left after the lawyers are paid. That's not ownership. That's a lottery ticket. Now contrast that with physical reality, a completed home, a freehold property, land, something that exists in three-dimensional space that you can walk through, touch, live in, something that isn't dependent on future performance by a bankrupt developer or the whims of a receivership court. The advice I'm giving you is brutally simple. Never buy pre-construction in a falling market. Never. I don't care how attractive the discount looks. I don't care what the sales agent tells you about getting in early or locking in today's prices. In a falling market, that discount isn't a deal. It's a risk premium. It's the market pricing and the probability that the building will never be completed or that it will be completed 5 years late into a market that's worth 30% less than today. The ghost sites are teaching us a lesson that our grandparents understood, but we forgot. Physical assets outlast paper promises. A half-finished tower in receivership is worth less than the land it's sitting on. But the land itself, the land is still there. It can't go bankrupt. It can't be put into receivership. Someone eventually will own it and do something with it, but the contracts, the agreements, the pre-sale allocations, those can evaporate, those can vaporize, and they are vaporizing right now across every major city in this country. Let me be very clear about what's coming next, because the trajectory is locked in. We are going to see more ghost sites, not fewer, more. The insolvencies we've seen so far, the one, Vandyk, the dozens of smaller projects that haven't made headlines, those are the early wave. The projects that were most over-leveraged, most exposed, most fragile. But behind them is a second wave, and it's bigger. Projects that are still technically solvent, but only because they haven't triggered a covenant breach yet. Developers who are making their debt payments by draining reserves, by selling other assets, by praying that something changes before the cash runs out. It won't change. The funding gap is structural. Lenders aren't going to suddenly start funding money-losing projects. Pre-sale buyers aren't going to materialize in a market where sales are at a 35-year low. The math doesn't work, and no amount of hope or government intervention is going to make it work. These projects are the walking dead. They just don't know it yet. And here's the cruel irony that should make you furious. We have a housing crisis, and we're destroying housing supply. We desperately need more units, and we're bankrupting the people trying to build them. The politicians will tell you this is a market failure, that we need more subsidies, more incentives, more programs. They're wrong. This is a credit failure. The market is screaming that building at current costs into current prices is suicide, and the developers who ignored that signal are being culled. What we're witnessing is the market's brutal mechanism for clearing out malinvestment. Projects that should never have been started are being killed. Capital that was misallocated is being destroyed. Equity holders who made bad bets are being wiped out. That process is necessary. It's painful, but it's necessary, because those resources, the land, the materials, the half-finished structures, need to be repriced and reallocated to uses that actually make economic sense. But here's what that means for ordinary people. The housing crisis is going to get worse before it gets better, much worse, because we're not just stopping new construction. We're actively destroying partially completed supply. Every ghost site is housing units that won't exist for years, maybe ever. Every receivership is families who won't have homes. The politicians promise 1.5 million new units. We're not going to hit that target. We're not going to come close, because the financial architecture required to build at that scale has collapsed. So what do? What's the action? Let me give you the framework, and you need to think about this seriously. First principle: avoid all exposure to paper real estate. No pre-construction, no assignments, no deals that require future performance by a counterparty you don't control. If it's not built, if you can't walk through it, if possession is contingent on someone else doing something, walk away. I don't care how good it looks on paper. Second principle: prioritize liquidity and optionality. In a collapsing credit market, the most valuable thing you can have is the ability to move quickly when opportunities appear. And they will appear. Those vulture funds I mentioned, they're going to make a fortune buying distressed assets at 40 cents on the dollar. But they can only do that because they have liquid capital ready to deploy. If your money is locked up in a deposit on a ghost site, you can't participate, you're frozen. Third principle: understand the difference between nominal value and real value. This is the money illusion, and it's one of the most dangerous psychological traps in an inflationary environment. You might get your $100,000 deposit back. That's the nominal value. But what can that $100,000 buy in 2027 compared to what it could buy in 2021? That's the real value. And if inflation has destroyed 30% of its purchasing power, you haven't broken even. You've lost 30%. The number on the check is the same, but the economic reality is devastation. This is how you become a millionaire on paper, but poorer at the grocery store. This is how you get your money back and still lose. Fourth principle, and this is the hardest one for people to accept: be willing to take a loss now to avoid a bigger loss later. If you're sitting on a pre-construction contract in a project that's showing signs of distress, delays, missed milestones, rumors of funding problems, get out. Forfeit the deposit if you have to. I know that's painful. I know it feels like admitting defeat, but a 10% loss today is better than a 100% loss 2 years from now when the project goes into receivership and you're stuck in legal limbo. This is triage. You're not trying to win, you're trying to survive. And finally, the most important principle: own things that can't be printed, promised, or postponed. This is where we come back to the core theme: physical assets, land if you can afford it, precious metals, gold, silver, as a hedge against the currency debasement that's funding all of this, not as an investment, as insurance, as a way of stepping out of the line of fire. Because when the credit system is imploding, when paper promises are evaporating, the only things that hold value are the things that physically exist and can't be conjured out of thin air by a government printing press or a developer's pro forma. The ghost sites are trying to tell us something. They're physical evidence. They're monuments to a credit system that overextended, overpromised, and is now collapsing under its own weight. Every crane that stopped moving is a warning. Every half-finished tower is a reminder that debt-fueled growth has limits, and we've hit them. The illusion was that we could build forever on borrowed money, that asset prices would always rise to validate whatever we paid, that the music would never stop. The reality is that the music has stopped. The liquidity tide is going out, and we're about to find out who's been swimming naked. Human beings are hardwired to believe that tomorrow will look like yesterday. It's called normalcy bias, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. We assume continuity. We assume that the systems we've relied on will keep functioning, that developers will keep building, that projects will get finished, that contracts will be honored, that the housing market works the way it's always worked. But structural breaks don't announce themselves with sirens and flashing lights. They happen quietly, one project at a time, one receivership at a time, one ghost site at a time, until you look up one day and realize the entire landscape has changed. We're in that moment right now. The landscape is changing. The old rules: buy pre-construction, flip on assignment, ride the appreciation wave. Those rules were written for a world of infinite credit and rising prices. That world is gone. We're in a new world now, a world where credit is scarce, where building is unprofitable, where half-finished towers rust in the sky while families sleep in shelters. It's not a world any of us wanted, but it's the world we have. The question is, are you going to adapt, or are you going to cling to the old assumptions until they drag you under? Because the market doesn't care about your hopes. It doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care that you've already invested 3 years and $100,000. It only cares about math. And the math right now says that building loses money, that leverage kills, that paper promises evaporate. The ghost sites are the proof. They're not coming back to life, they're corpses. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can make the decisions that might actually protect you. History favors the prepared. It always has. The people who saw the 2008 crisis coming and moved to cash, to hard assets, to safety, they survived. The people who held on, who believed the banks were too big to fail, who thought their subprime mortgage bonds were AAA rated and therefore safe, they were annihilated. This crisis is different in its mechanics, but it's the same in its essence. It's a credit collapse. It's a liquidation event. It's the market's way of destroying malinvestment and punishing those who believed the illusion could last forever. The window for preparation is closing, friends. Not closed, but closing. The ghost sites are the early warning system. They're telling you that the credit machine is broken, that the development industry is insolvent, that the promises made in 2021 can't be kept in 2025. If you're holding paper claims on future assets, you need to understand what you actually own. Not hope, not potential, a place in line at a bankruptcy proceeding. And if that's not acceptable to you, if you want something more than a legal claim on a building that might never exist, then you need to act now. While there's still time to choose, the cranes have stopped moving. That's not a pause. That's a message. And the message is simple. The old game is over. The new game has different rules. And the people who figure that out first are the ones who survive.